Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. I am your host, Mr. Kurt Wuckert Jr. We finally got Alex Moon back in the captain's chair. I feel like it's been a while. Alex has been, having it out with his parole officer in the Thai prison situation, and he's finally back. I think we're going to get to keep him this time. I'm hopeful. I'm grateful, and looking forward to all the cool stuff that we're up to. Before I start anything, please like, subscribe, hit the alert bell. I want everyone watching now to know every time that we go live, because we only go live with good information. And if you're watching live now, first of all, thank you. And second of all, share the link to this across social media. Let people know that you are currently watching the CoinGeek Weekly live stream, and that if anyone wants to put a comment or question or a blessing or a cursing or a grape, gripe, or grope into the troll box, that they can do it live on the air, and they can talk to either myself or they can talk to Zack Resnick, who is going to be our guest joining us in just a couple of minutes. But before we get there, you can check out flyflat.com. Because why not? They're an official sponsor of the not CoinGeek conference that's coming up in Dubai, but it is the global, what is it? The BSV Global Blockchain Convention for BSV is what I think it's called. But you can go, you can check that out. If you want to fly business or first class using FlyFlat, that's the way to do it. From the US over to Dubai, they really do a good job. So check them out. They're an official sponsor of the conference. Coming up in about 2 weeks now. 2 weeks. It's ridiculous. Then we also have the Crypto Craft folks have come back. Crypto Craft, check them out for the latest news and information on proof of work-based blockchains, coin prices, and forums. It's a really good spot to be able to have a little bit of chit chat. I like the forum vibe. Social media is fun, but I miss the old forum vibe, and these guys definitely have the forum vibe going on just right. I'm a big fan. Thank you, Crypto Craft, for your sponsorship. Also, we have a Slictionary word of the day, because holy forking hell, has it been a weekend. If anybody spent the weekend over on on the Twitter, we had not one but two people show up with clones of BSV that changed one small parameter or 2 or 3 little parameters, and now think they've got everything all figured out. So how things change. You can go check out what's going on in the new forking universe that we live in. So check out slicktionary.com if you can define the word better than anybody. And maybe it's one of the Novo people. Maybe one of the Novo people will be the very best at defining the word forking. They will win $25 directly out of the pockets of CoinGeek. So you can get those dollars that you so eagerly desire for just a little bit of proof of work. You just got to define forking better than anybody else, as voted for by the community itself. So good luck. Enjoy that. Check out slicktionary.com. Thank you to CryptoCraft and everybody else. Alex, are we going to play an ad before we come back with Mr. Resnick? Okay, we do.
This May, in Dubai, the BSV Global Blockchain Convention will bring together communities and unveil new breakthrough technologies where you can network with hundreds of expert practitioners, learn from forward-thinking brands and startups, propel your business forward. Join us at the BSV Global Blockchain Convention, May 24 to 26 in Dubai.
You know, Mr. Moon over here with the nonsense producing, cutting me off with the ad. I'm glad you're back, Alex. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Dubai. So, Zach, sorry. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing wonderful. Great to be on here today, Kurt. Thanks.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit. I don't think we've ever had you. We've had Dave, and I talk to Jack all the time, and I don't remember even if we've had him on the show, but I talk to Jack so often it feels like maybe I have.
Yeah.
We did have Jack, didn't we?
I think you think you had Jack. It was pretty forgettable, so it's understandable. But, yeah.
Oh man. All right. First of all, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I am a big fan of the Unbounded team, and each of you as individuals. I think of you all as friends, so I appreciate it very much. Zach, I ask everybody, Or when I don't ask, people then call me out for not asking. But can you please tell, to start out, what is your Bitcoin story? How did you discover it? And what first appealed to you about Bitcoin?
So I first started being around Bitcoin from poker. So Jack and I have that in common. We went to school together and we both studied jazz and met, playing some music together, him on the piano, me on the trumpet. And then shortly after starting to play music together, we realized we had a shared love of poker. And we both played a lot as teenagers, online for real money. And that kind of started a little mini poker renaissance for both of us in college, where we, would hang out and study poker for hours, many nights, and then started, playing together. And, that was like 2011, 2012. And if you look at online poker, then even some of like the major sites that weren't, crypto poker sites or whatever, they had the ability to withdraw and deposit in Bitcoin because, at that time and still today, the biggest bottleneck for people playing poker and other games of chance and gambling online has never been the will to do that, but it's been the kind of regulatory issues around moving money in and out. Something that why we have CoinGeek and the funding to do this stream today. They're very familiar with it. Bodog, Bovada. Back then it was Bovada that we were playing. And yeah, so kind of around it, it seemed really cool. I knew poker players were like, yeah, I cashed in on Bitcoin, forgot about it, and it's like up 50x. And I'm like, oh, that sounds scary. And like, but it sounded interesting. We didn't really seriously consider it till a chance encounter in 2016, where I was staying at an Airbnb in Tel Aviv. And the guy who ran the Airbnb was a guy named Yuval Ruach. And he started a company called Bits of Gold, either that year or the previous year, which at the time was just him and his brother doing this startup to convert Bitcoin to shekels in Israel. And now they're a much bigger company with operations, around the world. I think, 200, 300, 400 employees. And funny thing for, folks that know who Stas is, the founder of Stas Token, Stas actually, I think, owned that apartment at the time. So it was really funny when I met him and kind of learned this full circle story. But I had plans with friends for the next 48 hours. I canceled all of them to just nerd out with this guy about Bitcoin. And within like a week or two after that, I read the Bitcoin white paper probably 20 times, and then was really more excited from kind of the Austrian angle. And a lot of the reading I did after that was reading how do you pronounce it? Mises, whatever.
Mises, yeah.
Mises, yeah. So I read a lot of him and was just kind of going down that kind of hard money rabbit hole, and then put a decent chunk of all the money that I had at the time then into Bitcoin, which was not a terrible time to do so.
Yeah.
And then at the time I was, didn't start FlyFlat yet, but was doing a lot of what kind of FlyFlat is now scaled today, which was arbitraging credit card miles and points to help people get great deals on international business and first class travel. So I was largely doing that for myself to travel around the world in luxury for free or close to it, and then helping kind of family, some friends, and connections from those people. And the way that business works is it's technically generally against the terms and conditions to transfer miles or points from an account that, say, you own, Kurt, to someone like me. You could only do it to maybe a few nominated friends, family, and then for many miles and points programs, basically just you and your family. But there's loopholes, and my people historically have been great at finding and exploiting loopholes. So the Hasidic Jewish community.
Man, you said it. I don't know.
I did. I can say it. You can't say it.
Right.
Well, you can say it to me, but maybe not on the live stream.
It's fair.
So, basically, there's an incredible amount of liquidity on miles and points in the world that's largely kind of through the Hasidic Jewish community. And there's very few people that kind of have access and the trust to these private groups and communities. Really, no one that wouldn't be a Jewish man could really get meaningful access, at least in the way that we have at FlyFlat. And so at the time, I was just starting to build those relationships in the community. And Buenos Aires is actually the third largest, kind of Jewish, or Argentina, Buenos Aires, third largest Jewish community in the world after, Israel, New York, Israel, the United States. So when I saw that the price of Bitcoin, this was, a few months after getting excited about Bitcoin, was routinely like 30 or 40 points higher on Argentinian exchanges, kind of for obvious reasons, much more inflation there. And then this guy, Wences, can't pronounce his last name correctly, but Wences Casares, the founder of Zappo, was super evangelical within the Bitcoin and kind of high net worth community there about, using Bitcoin and really like every opportunity, like, hey, buy Bitcoin, I'll sell it to you. Doing all of that led to just a greater demand there. And it traditionally was really hard to take pesos out of, Argentina and still is today. But due to my connections in the Acidic community and kind of the trust gained from, the business I've done at, Fly Flat, I was able to partner with folks there and basically, use their information to set up Argentinian exchange accounts. And, basically it was just a question of, how quickly could I cycle the cash? And then whenever I, would kind of sell the lower priced Bitcoin that I got on a US or other exchange and sent it to the Argentinian exchange and sold it, I would then, withdraw those pesos into this, one of the different bank accounts in Argentina. And then at some point, 3 to 7, 10 days later, there'd be a wire that comes from a New York bank, with cash, and you kind of repeat it again. So
nice.
The story was kind of
a nice system.
Thanks. Yeah. And it lasted for a bit before that kind of ARB went away in, mid 2017. And yeah, so I kind of started by both getting really excited about just like kind of the inefficiency and money making opportunities. And that was, pretty life-changing for me. And then also just about the potential for this technology. And at the time, I was always an entrepreneur involved in usually multiple different businesses. Didn't really see myself as like a full-time investor or trader being a sustainable thing. But then found myself kind of moving to the Bay Area, living there for a little bit to try to get better networked within the crypto and blockchain world. And that's when I was like, okay, this is something I really need to focus in on, learn more. And I think like a lot of people, I was really caught up in a lot of the kind of like libertarian ideals for what Bitcoin and what blockchain, could do. And, was more focused and then try to justify like, and because we were all making so much money, it was like, oh, of course, like the world is inevitably going to change like this. And we all these rose-tinted glasses on. Most people in crypto still have those rose-tinted glasses on, but at the time it felt like basically everyone did. And then, long story short, considered, getting different kind of more not investor entrepreneurial ventures started. And then after managing some other people's money and just having more success with, moving from just trading to other types of investing, realized that, there's lots of room to innovate on being an investor. And I still, feel like I'm more of an entrepreneur than an investor today.
Sure.
And that's kind of the attitude I've taken with Unbounded Capital.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that really stands out. I've known you now for 2 or 3 years or something, but I remember when you guys first came out, and like, I've known a lot of venture capitalists and I've known a lot of traders actually. So I've known a lot of people that sort of take a position on either side of that and say, oh no, like this is my trading strategy. And like, I'm just going to stick to it until I'm rich or it kills me. And then you get the VC side, which is very much like, like you throw money at 1,000 things and like 50 of them will hit, and that we'll write off the losses and spin them into other things and whatever else. But like, you guys, from day one, first of all, the thought leadership that goes into the stuff that you do is excellent. Like it's very clear that you have a very focused thesis, and I love the actual work that goes into even just like the writing. I would get rid of everything else Unbounded Capital even does and say, you know what, you're a really good repository for just like thought about like why Bitcoin matters, and like that would be enough value for me from you guys. But then add in the rest, and I think it's a really just a really refreshing way actually to run an investment firm or fund or whatever you want to call the company type. But no, I think that's really clear that you sort of have a polymath view on things, that it's not just investment, it's not just trading, and it's not just entrepreneurship. Like those things are all valuable, obviously, but if you can sort of combine them into its own sort of unique goulash, then it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I mean, I think it's hard to dispute that, allocating capital and moving it around isn't, one of the most powerful forces in the world today. So there's always going to be a ton of room for innovation there. And, traditionally what you find is most people historically that have been allocating capital, whether from hedge funds, but it's venture, private equity, they have more of an asset management background, which is kind of a fairly hierarchical system where you kind of pay your dues doing BS work, working too much. And, and it's not really, it's something that rewards like kind of seniority, a certain type of like more corporate loyalty. And it hasn't been something where rewards, a lot of challenge to superiors, different ways of doing, new business models and things. But what we've seen, I think, especially over the last like five years, and definitely way more than ever before now, is that there's a lot of folks getting into venture capital that have a background building, tech startups and are taking that mindset to how they make investments and not, treating any of the sacred cows basically as sacred.
For sure.
So by not having, a traditional venture capital or even like asset management background, we're able to basically just, try to, with, first principles thinking, think about what made sense for us. And, some of the things, in retrospect, should we have just kind of not overthought it and taken the conventional view? Yes. But on the whole, I'm happy we kind of, thought about each aspect as, kind of a new decision for us to make and not just taking in kind of what happens traditionally in venture.
For sure. Absolutely. Here's a really good question, because I would argue that we've been in a bear market for 6 months, and people keep telling me I'm crazy, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent to the to the perma bulls that this might be an extended dramatic era for Bitcoin investment. And then BSV has never really had like the bullish couple of years that a lot of other people experience. So I'm very curious for your feedback on this specific question. How does the VC ecosystem change when number go down in tech or crypto for a prolonged period of time? And I think you're in a very unique position to comment on this with experience.
Thanks, Kurt. So I think what might not be obvious to most is that, the vast majority of capital that VCs are deploying are coming from institutional investors. And these are investors that have investment committees, they have serious processes, and they're deploying capital, across basically all sectors and asset classes. And what we've seen has been, some blips, but largely like a 20-ish year bull run for venture capital. And basically the higher percentage of your, endowment, your pension fund, your, family office, which is like a term for, folks that have usually at least 50, 100 million bucks, sometimes all the way up to tens of billions, basically have their own private, company to manage just their family or personal finances. The higher amount that you had in venture, basically the more money that you made. So we've seen that. And as a result of that dynamic, basically we see more and more as a percentage of people's total assets going into venture capital. And, what does that mean? It means that, on average, the more money that comes into a space in a given strategy, whether this is venture or anything else, the returns will get, a little bit worse for each marginal dollar. Of course, what we've also seen is the huge growth of the technology sector, such that even with all these more, dollars coming in, at least until recently, I think there's been a good argument to say that basically tech innovation and, the growth of new companies that has outpaced capital, which has allowed, returns to stay quite high. And that like, the beta for venture capital, or the beta for, the top 30, 40, 50% of venture capital, if you weed out maybe some obvious, not great venture firms, there's an argument to whether, people can do that over a long period of time. We don't need to get into that now. But, if you take away like the bottom 50% of venture and you look at that remaining, average return, that basically beats almost any like index, any other asset class. So more and more and more and more money going to venture because the investors in the venture funds keep making money. Now I see that as, unlikely to continue at that continuing growing rate, because I think a lot of, even top tier venture investors are likely to not get great returns or potentially even lose investor capital when you look at investments made over the years of, 2020, 2021, maybe even 2019. And so you kind of saw this after, venture capital in the late 90s, where everyone's putting more money in, everyone's indexing to venture, and then people lost a lot of money. And then, the investors of venture capital, is typically called LPs or limited partners, kind of pull that back. So there is a years long lag here where, if you raise a fund for 2020, you're typically going to deploy that between, let's say you close the fund on January 1st, 2020. You're going to deploy that between, the years of 2020 and usually like 2022. More recently, people have been deploying faster with just people chasing returns and trying to make a lot of money. But, let's say you deploy that money then, looks good, your paper valuations go up a lot. And then in a couple of years, like today, now you kind of see a reckoning and you see the public tech stuff going down. You maybe don't mark down your companies on your portfolio yet, but at some point this year, you're going to see these returns that look really good go from good to mediocre, or potentially go from good to bad or negative. And when you see that, you'll then see, okay, now as an investor, I don't want to invest more money with that venture capitalist. And actually, maybe I'm scared at the whole sector. And perhaps, I value more liquidity. So what we see from investors too is that liquidity and the ability to go in and out of positions when markets are going down is typically much more valued by investors. And venture capital, especially early stage venture capital, like what we do at Unbounded, is one of the most illiquid asset classes there is. We're giving money to companies at the very early stage, and if we're able to return all the capital through IPOs, direct listings, and acquisitions in 7 years, that'd be like pretty fast relative to average, where there's all sorts of different hedge funds and, you can get daily or weekly liquidity, private equity funds that are, every year liquidity. So that kind of illiquidity issue becomes bigger in kind of bear markets and when things go down. So, there's a lot of people that have written a lot about this. There's something called Open LP, which is like one of the bigger limited partners, getting a lot of other limited partners to write about their thoughts and things. I recommend if people want to look into this. There's a lot of great VCs that write about this on Twitter that I like to follow. But in short, there's kind of a feedback loop that isn't exactly like direct, where like in public markets, tech goes down a lot. The market reacts instantly because you see that liquidity there, and you see that real-time price discovery. In venture, especially early stage venture, it's like months or years lags between when the thing happens. So if you know how to play that, whether as an investor in venture funds or as a venture capitalist, that lag could be really good for you. And if you know how to play it, the lag can be bad for you. Ultimately, price discovery helps people make better decisions, and the less efficient a market is, the more the savvier people can make more money, and the more the less savvy people will not make that money.
Well, very interesting. I think a lot of people, especially in the blockchain space, like people are used to like, oh yeah, I put $1,000 in and I'm worth like $40 million because I put it into Shiba and I'm rich now and it's been 8 months, and obviously your thesis is going to be very different than that. I think a lot of people, and we've seen a lot of people say like, wow, VC doesn't even make sense in crypto for that reason. No, I would argue, look at
for what's the reason again? Because tokens went up a lot in the past. That's
because you can bootstrap yourself to a multimillionaire in a few months with the right trade. But it's very interesting to sort of realize that there are people that still have the ability to zoom out and make a 5-year plan, for example. What is it like on your end at Unbounded specifically, raising that money? So what are you telling to somebody who maybe could pretty trivially write you $1 million check? Like what does your pitch look like? Is it a lot of soft touches? Is it one hard pitch? I was blessed to go to one of your investor dinners, which was wonderful. Is that typical for you? Is that like a part of the sale consistently, or walk me through it, please?
So just to set the background at a high level, like raising money for a venture capital fund is one of like the longest, hardest sales cycles that there is. You're getting people to give you millions of dollars that's locked up typically for like 7 to 10 years. And then you usually like extend for a few companies that still haven't gotten liquidity yet. You're taking fees typically for the entire 7 to 10 plus, years. And, you're kind of waiting for these bets to play out. And especially if you haven't been doing this for 10 years, your track record of how companies are doing is an early indication. But even some of our most promising investments out of, the first fund that we did, there's still no guarantee any of those, despite maybe growing 50x or raising much higher valuations, that those will deliver a single dollar to our investors. So it's a hard sell as it should be, because I'm saying like, hey, give me millions of dollars. I'll place this into incredibly risky early stage company bets that you probably have very little ability to underwrite yourself. I will do a really good job doing that. And then if I do a great job, you'll get many multiples of your money in like 7 to 10 years time. So you really need to have kind of long-term oriented investors. And there's a lot of like crypto and blockchain, venture capital now that's really kind of like this continued token arbitrage game where people pay lip service to, I invest in infrastructure, I invest in crypto projects, but you're really investing in people that make tokens that give you liquidity in months or a year or two, and that's how you're returning money. So you've seen a lot of kind of
we're a small money printer, by the
way. Yeah, so there's a lot of short-term capital that tries to follow that. Yeah. But in terms of real venture capital exposure, people that have made venture investments before, they're familiar with how long it takes, and ultimately, for a lot of folks who could trivially write me a $1 million check, for them, they're viewing that as an option. So the same way that big VCs will invest, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million in smaller companies at the beginning, so then they have the option of deploying 30, 50, 100 million down the road, because that's the type of scale that they're deploying. A lot of investors to venture capital firms are thinking, okay, well, I want to try out, Unbounded and Zack with $1 million, $2 million in this, first relationship with them. And if I'm right, then they'll be good to me. And as they grow and manage billions over the coming decades, I'll be able to give them, my money and have first in line there, because venture capital returns are so like a lot of things in life have a Pareto distribution. If you're one of like the known funds, typically you get oversubscribed to how much capital you want to raise and can deploy and in terms of investor interest. So getting in early, there's kind of sometimes investors ask for specific terms, but there's typically just a culture of, hey, if you backed me early when it was a little perceived to be riskier, other people weren't doing it, you'll be able to invest that amount of money and potentially then some in every one of my future funds. And that's, of course, how we operate at Unbounded. Sure. So that's just a little background in terms of like what the pitch looks like and what the sales process is like. Really what we're seeing now is a lot of the payoff from years of hard work and writing come to fruition. So when the fund, first started, it was primarily, mine and the founding GP's, capital into the fund. We weren't playing around with a lot of money, and, now we're looking to play around with a lot more. So at that time, we didn't have a lot of capital, but we had a lot of ideas, a lot of energy. Yeah. So what, me, Jack, and Dave largely did was spend our time thinking and trying to codify that into writing. And of course, Jack and Dave did a lot more of the writing, and publishing than myself, where I was, often basically trying to translate those writings and things to people in person, whether it's like speaking on things like this or lots of one-on-one conversations. Yeah. So I'd say the writing and the content that we use is a big part of the sales process. We've recently started investing into more like tools and databases. So as you might have seen, Kurt, we have like the kind of canonical Bitcoin SV ecosystem database on our site now that lists what we try to list close to every product, company, service, media outlet within the Bitcoin SV ecosystem on our site as a helpful thing to show investors like, hey, when I tell you this is the second largest entrepreneurial and developer ecosystem outside of Ethereum and you've never heard of it, you don't have to trust me. You can verify this for yourself. Right. Most of them don't actually verify it, but just having that tool, maybe one of their analysts will look into it. Yeah. And then right now we're working on another tool which basically shows which blockchains are actually scaling, as defined as basically plotting user growth and user numbers or transaction growth to transaction cost. And what we've seen from our internal research is that the only blockchain that's getting cheaper over time as more people use it is Bitcoin SV. We expect Nova to surpass that tenfold tomorrow. No, and when we're selling now, the pitch used to be very focused on like, here's why Bitcoin SV is the best, and now as you probably have seen from some of our materials, the language we use is we focus on scalable blockchains because we legitimately do. And if there was another blockchain that came along that had the type of security profile and scalability and was empirically scaling in terms of actually getting cheaper, I mean, I think we would have to have some exposure there. And frankly, a lot of our founders that are some of the prominent founders in the BSV ecosystem I think it would behoove them to look at those different blockchains and potentially co-build, switch, or do whatever. For reasons we don't need to get into now, I think it's unlikely there'll be something that is seriously competitive with Bitcoin SV. But just kind of taking the pitch to be less technical and more high level, because even the folks that run blockchain fund to fund, so their job is solely to deploy tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into fund managers like me, most of the time they haven't heard of Bitcoin SV. Most of the time they don't really understand proof of work. This is probably not too surprising to you, Kurt. But you really just got to keep things kind of like high level and on how you're differentiated. So I think now we've really arrived at a pitch which is like, hey, the vast majority of your crypto and blockchain exposure and who you're talking to has a lot of exposure to the speculative crypto market. You have exposure to these tokens going up and down either directly in tokens, or you have exposure with these poorly levered bets on the crypto market like exchanges, prime brokers, and miners. With us, we're exclusively backing founders that are trying to solve big problems that use blockchain where their customers and users don't need to and probably won't even know that blockchain is being used. And we can say that, like, yes, there'll be second and third order effects where if the tech public markets crash and crypto markets crash, like, will that negatively affect portfolio companies of ours? Sure, but less so than any other fund that we're aware of. So I think especially for diversified investors where it's like, hey, I have $1 billion. I currently have 15 million in a combination of BTC, ETH, 3 other funds, and I have a mandate now to deploy 5 million over the next year or two into 3 to 5 funds. Getting $1 million or 2 of those dollars is a much easier sell than saying, here's why we're right and everyone's wrong. And we didn't, literally try to do that, but there was a lot more of that energy when we first started the fund. And now I think, the pitch for the one-on-one meeting is getting successful, but to kind of end this point and circle back to a succinct answer to your original question, which is, what does sales process look like? These days now, it's a lot of one-on-one meetings. So those are primarily over Zoom, but I'm traveling a good amount. I live in Austin, Texas, but I'm regularly in LA, San Francisco, New York, and Miami. Still most over Zoom, where I'm meeting one-on-one with, usually kind of 1 to 3 people on the investment team of the institutional investors. And now my schedule is pretty much filled most days with like a set number of calls that I don't exceed for my mental sanity. Where when we first were starting, it was like, I just was scraping to get meetings. So I would take not serious people, would try to raise as little as 50K, 100K per person, where now kind of our institutional minimum is, $1 million. Our individual minimum is 250K. And, it's primarily talking with serious people that have vetted us, that have looked at things. But of course, all the media stuff that I'm doing like now with kind of, folks outside the BSV ecosystem, these dinners that I'm doing that you've attended, probably some people listening to this have attended. These are all part of it. And ultimately, the sales process for Unbounded is not just about raising investor capital. It's also about kind of social capital with future, entrepreneurs, and making sure that we're kind of known as, hopefully the first choice or one of the first choices for folks that are building on BSV or other scalable blockchains that might come along in the future. Say, hey, here's a firm that has a very specific vision about the long-term vision of blockchain. If you're aligned in that vision, we want to support you. And of course, getting other VCs in. So I think I didn't do enough work trying to get other venture capitalists into the scalable blockchain BSV thesis. And I've started to work really hard at that this year. So as you probably noticed from that dinner we did in Florida, you maybe had like 10 or 12 other VCs that, I wanted to get interested in some of the companies that, we've invested in and our thesis. And typically with those folks, the sales process is more around, hey, here's this great company, here's what they're doing. And, oh, yes, they happen to use BSV because the only thing that allows them to do it. Not around, here's why we're right about like BSV and you should like come join our cult, No,
it's brilliant. I love it. You currently you are raising for a fund currently, as I understand it. Is it the case?
Yeah. So, disclaimer, our fund is just for, accredited investors. And we have kind of our full legal disclaimers on a link that I will put in a moment. But yeah, we're raising our second fund. It's a traditional VC fund structure. Okay. And we're going to, raise something around $70 million over the next year. And then we'll deploy that over about 3 years into some of the top startups that are building on Bitcoin SV. Some of these will include some of our portfolio companies in our first fund. And there'll be many new companies that, hopefully haven't been started yet that we'll be able to back from the beginning and help them grow. Oh, you're muted.
Oop, my bad. Brilliant. So from a portfolio standpoint, some of the bright spots in your portfolio are some of the most used tools in the BSV space. And 2 that really stand out to me are Run and Handcash, which are combined almost every transaction on the network coming from those two. And so those are two really great pieces right there of a much bigger puzzle. But if let's say I'm a app developer, game developer, wallet developer, do you want the maybe plucky startup that's self bootstrapped to, up to this point? Maybe it's a CEO and a CTO. Are you looking for people like that to come approach you guys and to ask you for money? Or what does that process look like? How do you find people for the portfolio?
Yeah, it's a combination of everything. We've had many investments we've made or considered where folks are coming to us. We have investments where some of our founders, like Brenton and Alex that run Handcash, kind of refer folks to us and vice versa.
Sure.
And then of course we're doing a ton of things to hopefully find entrepreneurs and founders ourselves directly. And also part of that is, even if they're not a fit for Unbounded, most of my friends that I hang out with are kind of working in tech and crypto, and most people are not in the BSV ecosystem. So even if I could just, help one less founder wed themselves to the Ethereum network to try to build their life's work, and whether they consider BSV or not, that's like a big part of what we're doing as well, of just like kind of sharing our point of view of what makes sense for us. But, I think to kind of part of your question, basically what makes something venture scaled, it's, the ambition to build a big company that requires, not necessarily tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, although in most cases it will, but at least kind of millions of dollars and trying to grow quickly now. And I want to be the first to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with running a bootstrap business. Fly Flat, my business, is basically completely bootstrapped, and is a big reason why I've been able to invest in Unbounded Capital in the way that I have. I haven't really taken much money in terms of salary from Unbounded Capital. That only started more recently, and I only was able to do that because I had a profitable cash flowing bootstrap business. So I think the vast majority of businesses, one should be wary of taking venture capital, and people that do take venture capital, I think, should be very, very careful about who they choose to work with. And a book that I would recommend folks to look into if they really want to understand kind of the history of venture capital and different approaches is something called Power Law. It's a really, really wonderful book that I think anyone that is serious about taking venture capital money or wants to learn more about the space, that will illuminate a lot. But yeah, we're looking to back founders that basically want to take over the world and whatever that looks like for them.
I like it,
and have ambitions that are basically nothing shy of that. So there's a lot of great businesses, a lot of great ways to live your best life, to help people in the world, and a small fraction of those are venture scaled businesses. And that's what we focus on at Unbounded, which is, giving people kind of the capital, the advice, hopefully some network and assistance with, recruiting and growing the team to allow them to take that idea from being an idea to making a huge impact in just, a short number of years. And there's definitely possible to reach that level of scale of business and not be venture backed. But when you look at kind of the stats for, tech companies that go like public or direct list, and, it's something around 2% of all like tech companies are venture backed, but it's about 50% of the IPOs. So venture capital definitely, while there's a lot that it does, there's individual examples where there's a lot of bad that individual VCs do, and a lot of examples where companies are better off not taking certain venture capital or not taking that much venture capital. Overall, I think venture capital serves a really, really great need in the world, which is basically giving more capital from incredibly rich investors and institutions that have more money than they know what to do with, and putting that rather into mature companies, but into kind of the next innovative wave of companies changing the world. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope that the venture capital industry as an asset class continues to grow, so it just becomes easier and easier for anyone to start a business, and hopefully in the future that doesn't just have to be venture-backed businesses. So there already are increasingly more ways to access capital for non-venture-backed businesses, but I look forward to hopefully within a decade or a couple decades where you can basically choose on the scale of like solo entrepreneur to venture capital and just say, okay, here's where I am, and like here are all the myriad of funding sources for me.
No, that's brilliant. One of the things that a truly scaled blockchain can offer is able to choose that stuff with some simplicity. One of the things that I bring up often, like I criticize some communities because of like whose portfolio they're in. Like I will call out the Andreessen Horowitz's, the digital currency groups, and some of these others, and will make the insinuation that like, well, Blockstream and Lightning Labs and BitPay and Coinbase and Kraken are all in portfolio X, and therefore the advisors and managers and people up the chain will have some influence on the behavior of the company. And I have been called a crazy conspiracy theorist for saying such a thing. I'm curious, from your experience, how much of an influence do you guys have in like in the sense where you help the direction of the brand, or how much say do you have in that kind of thing? Like if somebody is accepting let's say $1 million from Unbounded Capital, what strings are attached, either for better or worse, for that founder to join your portfolio?
I mean, the main string is just that we're aligned on vision, and that vision includes like what success looks like. So, having a multi-million-dollar company that you run is a huge smashing success for anyone in the world.
Right.
But that's not a success for Unbounded Capital. So just making sure that we're aligned, that like being a big company that has a big impact, that's really important. And then having alignment in terms of, what the vision is to get there. There's no shortage of ways, maybe a little bit less so now with current market conditions, but there's no shortage of ways to make a quick buck, building a new DeFi protocol, building a new kind of algorithmic lending protocol. We want to back folks that are building for the long term, that are solving big problems, where success for them isn't telling a great story and getting their token out at 100x. That's not success for us. So we just, alignment of vision is kind of the main strings that are attached. But then also, traditionally in venture, kind of pre-crypto, you never really back competing companies that are directly competitive with one another. Of course, at a certain degree of scale, a lot of companies start to become competitive, but not like directly competitive in their initial kind of markets.
Sure.
So we had an example where, there's a founder that we really like that was building something that felt quite directly competitive to Handcash. We wanted to do the deal, but we had to pass because for us, we can't have two companies that are directly competing in kind of the same type of product and market, because it wouldn't allow us to best support and honor our commitments to Handcash. So unfortunately, you don't see a lot of that in the crypto space today. There's a lot more kind of commingling and investing in directly competitive things. But I do think that is important. And if you're a founder considering taking venture capital, you should really do your diligence on what that portfolio looks like and what that says about their vision and about, who they're going to back. And listen, there's a lot of, venture investors and like family offices that maybe don't say, I'm going to add a bunch of value added service, and just say, hey, here's capital. I'm going to kind of get everyone that I like. And as long as you're clear on that, that's fine. But if you're going to work with a real like venture capital firm, I think you want to make sure that they're not backing competitors, because then what happens is, those two competitors are raising a Series A at the same time. And what will happen is that, you'll basically, all the VCs will ask, which one of these deals do you like more? And whichever one you say is the one that gets funded and, keeps going down the road. The other might fail, where if they didn't take your money, they could have kept going. So there's some really disastrous things that could happen if you're not thoughtful about kind of which partners you're working with.
Sure. Well, and that's exactly why I bring up Digital Currency Group, for example, is I think they have probably the largest portfolio in the space, but they have brands like BitPay and Coinbase that 5 years ago were perceived as big blocker allies. Yeah. And then they had Blockstream and Lightning Labs, which are the pinnacle of small blocker. And so at the end of the day, like the person writing the check, because at the time, all of these companies were not profitable. And so you have the same basic people floating the ship. And I have argued like, well, they were playing both sides against the middle. Like these companies have very, very different strategic vision.
Yeah.
And like, how is there not like a bizarre conflict of interest as to, or maybe the entire debate, the entire scaling debate was itself like a sort of AstroTurf to make it look, because ultimately it's all good for the portfolio, and we'll decide what makes the most sense once we've gone down this road a little bit. And yeah. So I think, like I said before, I really appreciate the fact that you guys are very clear with your thesis, and to the point where like specifically you have your own thought leadership as a firm that, I've seen. I feel like I just haven't seen it from the general crypto people, aside from the very generic, we're disrupting finance. we're going to change the face of lending or whatever else.
Sure.
And I think that they all have a tendency to focus very much on financial vehicles. Like you look at the portfolios and they're looking to, hey, we're gonna disrupt mortgage finance or whatever, and we're all focused on that. And I think one thing that stands out about BSV is that there is this sort of everything approach. Like we're kind of trying to disrupt the internet, which means we're trying to disrupt all kinds of sectors.
Yeah.
Does it cause you issues on your end to try to decide like what direction do you want to go? Like there's so many things to do in BSV.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will down the road more so, but for now we take a more infrastructure approach, which is we try to think, okay, regardless of which industry you're trying to disrupt, what tools do you need to make that easier? So we want to invest in the companies that allow people to take advantage of, say, a scalable blockchain's incredible properties without having to understand it themselves. And the two examples you mentioned, Hand Cash and Run do that great. So you don't need to be a BSV believer. You don't need to understand blockchain. You just want to be like, hey, I want to accept one-set payments easily. And Hand Cash is kind of your best option. If you want to, do a bunch of things with smart objects and NFTs, Run can do it for, some of the cheapest that is and easiest and most efficient ways that are possible in the broader world blockchain are not today. So those are the types of companies we like today because we see it just as such a blue ocean that we want to, not pick who's going to be the next, Twitter competitor, for example. I don't think we're going to have a huge edge in picking what the future of social media is. That we're going to take, our kind of technical expertise and our vision on the future of blockchain and say, hey, how do we make it so we win in as diverse a number of scenarios as possible? So like we take a super small funnel in terms of like our thesis of like, take out everything that isn't blockchain, take out everything that isn't BSV today, potentially some future scalable blockchains in the future, but likely just BSV. And then within that, we try to, have it be relatively wide of, okay, how in a lot of scenarios are we able to kind of come on top, which today looks like infrastructure, but I think in the future, similar with kind of the advent of, cloud computing and the internet, infrastructure players were, pretty great bets at the beginning. And then the majority of companies that capture the value were kind of more applications and companies that use those things. So I think we're still in that infrastructure phase right now, which makes our job a lot easier. And then hopefully we'll just get a lot smarter by the time we have to, meaningfully diversify away from that infrastructure. It doesn't mean we don't invest in, things that aren't like core blockchain infrastructure today. That's kind of our focus.
Very cool. What are the next steps? Like, what do you wish I had asked you?
What do you wish you had asked me? I mean, I think nothing that I wish you would have asked me. I think I always enjoy our conversations, Kurt. It was great to spend a meaningful amount of time together in, Miami not too long ago.
Absolutely.
I think the next steps are, just to share for anyone listening to this that's building within the Bitcoin SV ecosystem is just, work hard. If you're building something awesome, it will work out in the long run, and there will be more and more capital partners that will care about, your product and your vision, and not about which blockchain that you happen to use. Right. It's been really hard being so early to crypto and blockchain, relatively speaking. Not compared to the OGs like Kurt, but compared to the vast majority of folks that are throwing money at crypto and blockchain today, it's hard for me to be there kind of years before, take this contrarian approach, and then see all these new people take in hundreds of millions and billions of dollars to deploy to consensus views. But ultimately, unless you're just trying to play this kind of short-term money grab thing, which I think is unlikely to result in kind of long-term happiness and fulfillment, you kind of have a thesis and hopefully you make that thesis falsifiable. And as long as that thesis still works for you, whether it's on your business or on kind of the broader crypto and blockchain opportunity set, you kind of stick with it to the degree that you can. So just, I think next steps are, I think a lot of folks in the space know what a lot of the next steps are. And it's just hard. It could take a lot more time, could take not a lot of time. And I would just say, continue to stick it out and to also just be as inviting as possible to folks from kind of the crypto consensus or folks that don't get it. Ultimately, the vast majority of people in the world are, want to support great businesses and great people trying to make change in the world. So there's no shortage of people that fit that profile, and focusing on those people rather than the divisive Twitter people or the block streams of the world, I think will, from personal experience, lead to both greater success and to, I think, greater personal happiness than kind of focusing on what's happening on, crypto Twitter.
No, for sure. So I've been sort of punting on questions for a lot of this interview because I'm enjoying just the chat. So let's bang out a few. And anybody watching, if you want to ask the question that's been on your mind, I will try to machine gun through them a little bit here. Cool. JP, Zach, what are your thoughts on the IPv6 implementation stuff with BSV?
Kurt, can you refresh my memory on IPv6 and share it for the audience?
Recently, and it's funny, I actually just watched a 2014 video of Craig Wright that I hadn't watched in years, and he brings up IPv6 integration and its requirement for a payment protocol. So recently it was in the Middle East. I can't remember if it was Saudi Arabia or in Dubai, but Craig gave a presentation with the IEEE people, who is a standards body that's decades old in the tech space.
Yeah. And
talking about how the newest internet protocol upgrade, the IPv6 upgrade to the internet, requires or has the option to have an integrated payment technology, and that Bitcoin was designed with this in mind 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have said, this is just all smoke and mirrors, but this is the new Craig thing that he's talking about that's new. But I actually, like I said, I just recently was going through an old video, and he brought it up in 2014 that, IPv6 should have a Bitcoin integration because of, and it was okay. He's been stewing on this for many years now. So what do you think about that sort of level of sort of an infrastructural integration with BSV?
Yeah, I mean, I think that stat or something like that is close to inevitable, whether it's with BSV or something else. The grand vision that we share at Unbounded, that is kind of our highest conviction bet, more so than, say, even BSV or a scalable blockchain working, a specific scalable blockchain working, is that, a ton of the most important and secure information in the world will be on a secure public database. And that secure public database will kind of supercharge the internet. So from the same way we went from pieces of paper to intranet to private databases on the internet to largely cloud computing using the internet. So we're accessing hundreds, thousands, potentially more different private databases right now to have this conversation. And there's a lot of examples where that's not the most efficient way of interacting and communicating with data over the internet. So for the examples where it's much more efficient for all of us to access a single database, I think that is going to have to be kind of implemented at the core protocol level to the internet. And frankly, I haven't spent enough time to have any strong conviction on, the likelihood of that with IPv6 and BSV in the near term. But in terms of at a high level, I think something like that is very likely to occur. And that's what we're betting on at Unbounded.
No, for sure. And I admittedly have not done a ton of due diligence on it myself, but I've read the sort of the briefs, and the people that he's talking to are people at a very high level that are the decision makers on such a thing. These are committees of folks that work in computer science that make the decision, like, we will call this USB 6, and that's the standard for the next decade. So it's not like just a concept that doesn't have any legs. It's being discussed with the kind of people that could, with the few strokes of a pen, make that a reality. So I'm optimistic.
Awesome.
Question from Joey, who is a Floridian like myself now, asking, would you consider opening a Florida-based dojo? I don't know if he's getting the Block Dojo people mixed up with you guys, but you want to do an incubator in Florida, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. Joey, Kurt and I have actually already kind of discussed this. When we first got started with this kind of blue ocean mindset of, okay, we want to allocate capital to this kind of new wave of crypto and blockchain. What's the best way to do that? We really flirted quite heavily with kind of doing an accelerator or incubator. One of our, folks on the team on the investment committee, Mike Hennessy, Kurt, who you met with recently, he has a lot of experience working with and running accelerators and incubators. And ultimately, we decided against doing it then, and kind of against now. It's really just a bandwidth thing where we feel like deploying kind of bigger checks to more established startups will make a bigger impact on the space and make better use of our team's unique talents right now. But in terms of kind of the empire and the firm of Unbounded Capital that I want to have over the coming decades, do I think we'll have incubators? 100%. Do I think Florida and South Florida is a place where I want to have a greater physical presence? 100%. Probably the soonest something like that could happen would be something like where we're, partnering with Kurt and something that you do down there where, it's not like an unbounded incubator. And I hope there's an opportunity for us to, not spend a lot of time, but add a lot of value and assist with any of those efforts there, as our private conversations have alluded to. But yeah, I hope to be part of, incubators or things like incubators over the coming decades to basically make it easier for more people to be entrepreneurs.
Love it. So a question from Dilip Patel. If you have a 3-figure BSV, I'm guessing a 3-figure BSV portfolio, where would you invest at the moment if you are not a developer, but just a BSV investor?
So I love this question. So my thesis for, pretty much everyone that wants to be an entrepreneur, wants to better themselves, is that until you have a meaningful amount of capital that you could invest and start to get decent dividends from. So at least, for someone that's living anywhere in the United States, probably nothing less than like 100,000, probably at least hundreds of thousands. I would say don't save any of your money and use that to invest in yourself and become better at things, get better skills, invest in potentially have savings. So you're investing in kind of the ability to quit a job or in the ability to have a longer runway to own your time for longer. But really, the most precious resource we have in this life is time. So until you have kind of a lot more capital, and if that's something that you intend to have, putting yourself in a better position to amass that capital, like it's going to be very rare that, especially if you're kind of younger and, you have $50,000, you invest that in what maybe optimistically you could expect to make 20-25% a year. So you're looking at, okay, you're making like 10K, a little more than 10K a year, rather than think about what you can get if you were to spend that money on yourself and bettering yourself, bettering your life, bettering your business. So I think, I encourage everyone to, spend and even consider taking on small amounts of debt if you're comfortable with it and get low interest rates to be able to put yourself in a position to succeed in life.
No, for sure. And we got about 2.5 minutes left. So let's make a couple of snappy ones. When looking at a new startup to invest in, what do you look for primarily?
So when we're investing at the early stage, a lot of it is about people. So we kind of narrow things down to the thesis and blockchain. So after we've already done that, most of what we're evaluating is really kind of like people and the potential size of what can happen. But if you look at some of those successful startups in the world, the initial market size for Uber Cab or the initial market size for Airbnb spending time on people's couches was quite small and probably below average and a lot of VCs passed because the market size wasn't very big. So really, especially at the early stage when we're the first or one of the first checks, it's really a people's business. So, we have kind of all this stuff on our site. That's what our portfolio is, what our thesis is. But ultimately, we're looking for kind of all the qualities that make a great founder, which is, grit, resilience, focus, hard work. It's not rocket science, but it's quite difficult to implement and show up that way for the years that it takes to run the marathon of, running a successful business.
Sure. Looking at Unbounded site, the Opportunity Fund, it shows an interest over 1,000%. Could you clarify how these rates were achieved?
So my lawyer's probably already going to be mad at me for what I've shared about our fund too. So I can't directly address this, but Luis, if you email me at Zack, ZACH, unboundedcapital.com, can have someone from the team, answer that question directly. We also do have information in the disclaimers of that slide about how that is achieved if you want to kind of look at that text there.
For sure. Do you know any educational startups in the BSV space? It seems like this is a legacy industry ripe for disruption.
So I don't off the top of my head, but I actually have a bunch of friends that I know through kind of poker that run interesting like ed tech startups. So it's a space that I've thought a decent amount about. And yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, whether you're using a blockchain or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you give us the red pill on flyflat.com before we let you go?
The red pill. Well, we arbitrage credit card miles and points to get the best deals in the world and international business and first class tickets. We also know have great deals for luxury hotels. But basically, if you are listening to this and regularly fly business class and want to routinely save 30-40% on those flights, you should contact us, fly-flat.com, and mention that you heard about it through CoinGeek. And then anyone that is flying to Dubai and wants to get a deal on that, feel free to give us a contact. But yeah, we primarily serve investors and builders in kind of the investing world and the crypto and blockchain world, and are flying at a lot of the people for this upcoming, Dubai summit. And I personally won't be able to be there, unfortunately. But Cameron Resnick, who runs Fly Flat, as well as, 3 of our other team members will be there. And, feel free to go up to them at the conference if you find yourself in Dubai.
Brilliant. Zach, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kurt.
All right. Talk to you soon. All right, everybody. This episode was brought to you by CryptoCraft. Check out cryptocraft.com. Yes. Sorry. Had to check my bookmark. Check out cryptocraft.com for news, forums, and prices of proof of work blockchains. Also, go do the word of the day. It is a big forking opportunity to make $25 at slictionary.com. Jack Pitts will probably come up with a very funny pun for whoever wins it, as long as it's a good answer. So get out there, go earn some forking money by defining forking at slictionary.com. And of course, thank you to Alex Moon for making it all the way to his desk to produce the show in such a way that makes me look professional and makes all of us look real good. I am looking forward to seeing you in Dubai, everybody. You should go sign up for the Global Blockchain Conference. Come see myself on stage, as well as a great deal of other people talking about the power of Bitcoin SV, the only scalable proof of work blockchain in existence. Everybody else is cutting it up some other way. They're giving you a bill of goods that isn't exactly what you're going to receive. And you can come learn about it in the sunny, delightful, and very warm city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Until next week, thank you to everybody for watching. I appreciate you, the fans. I appreciate my wife and kids for doing everything that they do to make all of this possible, for lending me to the CoinGeek platform so that I can do these shows. Everybody, check out CoinGeek.com, read the articles, share the articles, and interact with us across social media. And again, before we close, please like, subscribe, hit the alarm bell so that I can continue to have a job telling you about what's going on in the space. I am Kurt Wuckert Jr., breathlessly saying good evening and be good to each other. So that's it. Goodbye.
This May, in Dubai, the BSV Global Blockchain Convention will bring together communities and unveil new breakthrough technologies where you can network with hundreds of expert practitioners, learn from forward-thinking brands and startups, propel your business forward. Join us at the BSV Global Blockchain Convention, May 24 to 26 in Dubai.